Flight 719 was an overnight direct flight from London to Singapore, operated by one of the most reputable airlines in the world. The Boeing 777 aircraft was fully booked, carrying 300 passengers and 15 crew members. For most, it was just another long-haul journey. But for a select few, it would become a terrifying ordeal they would never forget. The flight took off smoothly from Heathrow Airport at 10:30 p.m. Passengers settled into their seats, some watching in-flight entertainment, others dozing off under the dim cabin lights. Among the passengers were Daniel and Emily, a young couple heading to Singapore for their honeymoon. They had no idea that their romantic getaway would begin with a night of sheer terror. 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over the European continent, strange things began to happen. It started with a series of unexplained technical glitches. The seatbelt sign flickered on and off repeatedly, despite the aircraft cruising smoothly at 35,000 feet. The flight attendants, led by senior purser Karen, tried to reassure the passengers that it was just a minor electrical issue. Daniel noticed the first oddity when the in-flight entertainment system in their row abruptly shut down, displaying only static. Emily, who was trying to watch a movie, frowned and attempted to restart the system, but it remained unresponsive. "Must be a glitch," Daniel said, trying to sound reassuring. Emily nodded, but the unease was clear on her face. She glanced around and noticed that several other passengers were experiencing similar issues. The murmurs of discontent grew louder, prompting Karen to make an announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some minor technical difficulties with the in-flight entertainment system. Our technicians are looking into it, and we appreciate your patience." Despite Karen's calming tone, a sense of unease began to spread through the cabin. As the flight progressed, the strange occurrences escalated. Passengers reported feeling sudden drops in temperature, and some even claimed to see mist forming in the aisles. The flight crew, trained to handle emergencies of all kinds, found themselves in uncharted territory. One of the flight attendants, Mark, was preparing drinks in the galley when he felt a cold draft pass through. He turned around, expecting to find a fellow crew member, but the galley was empty. Shaking off the feeling, he continued his work, only to hear a faint whisper behind him. "Help me." Mark froze, his blood running cold. He spun around again, but there was no one there. His hands trembled as he hurried back to the main cabin, where he found Karen. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Karen replied, looking concerned. Someone asked for help," Mark said, glancing nervously around the cabin. Karen tried to reassure him, but the look in her eyes betrayed her own growing anxiety. They both knew that something was very wrong. Meanwhile, in their seats, Daniel and Emily were growing increasingly uneasy. Emily had fallen into a restless sleep, but Daniel remained wide awake, unable to shake the feeling that they were not alone. As he stared out the window into the dark abyss of the night sky, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. A face, pale and ghostly, staring back at him from the other side of the glass. Daniel blinked, thinking his mind was playing tricks on him, but the face remained. It was a woman, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She mouthed something, but Daniel couldn't hear her. He reached out instinctively, but as he did, the face vanished. Breathing heavily, Daniel turned to wake Emily, but she was already stirring, her face pale and covered in a sheen of sweat. "I had a nightmare," she whispered, clutching his hand. woman. She was asking for help. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. "I saw her too," he said, his voice shaking. As the hours dragged on, the sightings became more frequent and more intense. Passengers reported seeing shadowy figures moving through the aisles, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. Some claimed to hear disembodied whispers, while others felt an unseen presence touch them. The flight crew, despite their training, were at a loss. They tried to maintain calm, but their own fear was palpable. Karen, normally unflappable, found herself praying silently as she walked through the cabin, trying to offer comfort to the increasingly agitated passengers. Halfway through the flight, the situation reached a breaking point. The plane suddenly hit a pocket of severe turbulence, jolting passengers awake and sending items flying through the cabin. The lights flickered and then went out completely, plunging the aircraft into darkness. Panic erupted. Passengers screamed, and some began to cry. Karen and her crew tried to restore order, but their voices were drowned out by the chaos. Then, as suddenly as it began, the turbulence stopped, and the lights flickered back on. In the eerie silence that followed, a chilling sight greeted them. Written in condensation on the cabin windows were the words, "Help me," repeated over and over. The pilot, Captain Hughes, made an urgent announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Please remain calm. We are experiencing some technical issues, but we are in contact with air traffic control and are working to resolve the situation. We will be diverting to the nearest airport for an emergency landing." The next few hours were a blur of fear and confusion. The apparitions continued, their presence becoming almost unbearable. Some passengers fainted, while others huddled together, praying for the nightmare to end. As the plane began its descent, the ghostly activity reached a fever pitch. Daniel clutched Emily's hand tightly, his knuckles white with tension. The face he had seen outside the window now appeared in the aisle, moving closer, her eyes pleading. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in Daniel's mind. He wanted to scream, to run, but he was paralyzed by fear. Emily, too, saw the apparition and squeezed his hand, tears streaming down her face. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the plane touched down at an emergency airport in Dubai. The landing was rough, but the passengers erupted in applause, grateful to be back on solid ground. As they disembarked, paramedics and airline officials met them. The passengers were taken to a secure area where they were given medical evaluations and a chance to recount their experiences. Many were in shock, struggling to process the night's events. Daniel and Emily sat together, holding each other tightly. When it was their turn to speak with the airline officials, they described everything they had seen and heard. "You're not the first," one of the officials said gravely. "We've had reports of similar incidents on this route before. It seems to be connected to a tragedy that occurred many years ago. A flight attendant on one of the early flights from London to Singapore disappeared mid-flight. They never found her body, but passengers have reported seeing her spirit ever since." The realization hit Daniel and Emily hard. The woman they had seen, the one pleading for help, was the spirit of the lost flight attendant, trapped between worlds, seeking someone to finally acknowledge her existence. The airline promised to investigate further and offered counseling to all passengers. Daniel and Emily accepted, but they knew that what they had experienced would haunt them forever. In the end, Flight 719 became a part of aviation folklore, a cautionary tale whispered among airline crews and frequent flyers. The ghostly presence on the London to Singapore route remained a mystery, a chilling reminder of the tragedies that can linger in the shadows of our world. For Daniel and Emily, their honeymoon began with a brush with the supernatural, a terrifying journey that would bond them in ways they never imagined. And though they would go on to have many more adventures together, they would always remember the haunted flight that marked the beginning of their married life, a flight deep into the unknown, where the line between the living and the dead was blurred by the desperate plea of a restless soul. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. We'll be back with more fascinating stories from the world of crime. Until then, stay curious and stay safe.